On November 20th, 2000, Eminem released one of the most influential songs in music history. Stan, the third single promoting the Marshall Mathers LP, is a song telling the story of Shady's obsessive fan, whose love and obsession with the artist ultimately led to his death. In addition to its musical success, Stan achieved much more. It became a cultural phenomenon. The word Stan began to be used to describe overly obsessive fans, and in June 2017, the word was officially added to the Oxford English Dictionary. But today, 25 years later, Eminem has decided to pay tribute to his most ardent fans by releasing the documentary Stans. However, this is not a documentary like any other, as Eminem has decided to make his fans the focal point of the entire film. Today, we look at how the tragic story of a symbolic fan led to the creation of a cult and a social phenomenon that even Marshall himself could not ignore.
Just a chat, truly yours, your biggest fan, this is Stan.
It was November 20th, 2000. Eminem had already changed the game once with the Slim Shady LP, but with his follow-up, the Marshall Mathers LP, he would rewrite the rules again, this time with a song that no one saw coming. Stan was the third single from the album, a dark, haunting story told from the perspective of a mentally unstable fan named Stanley Mitchell. Over Dido's Thank You sample, Eminem constructed a fictional but disturbingly realistic narrative. Stan writes increasingly desperate letters to Eminem, growing angrier with each unanswered message, until he ends up driving off a bridge, killing himself and his pregnant girlfriend. It wasn't just violent or shocking, it was introspective, cautionary. It forced the audience to look at fame from the inside out and the consequences of parasocial obsession. Despite its unsettling tone, Stan was a commercial and critical success. It reached number 1 in 12 countries, including the UK, Germany, and Australia. It peaked at number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the US, partly due to lack of commercial single availability at the time, but became a staple on MTV and radio regardless. The music video, directed by Dr. Dre and Philip Atwell, became iconic. Devon Sawa's portrayal of Stan, combined with Eminem's dual role and Dido's cameo, etched the visuals into music video history. And then came an even greater moment. At the 2001 Grammy Awards, Eminem performed the song live with Elton John, a controversial but symbolic moment that challenged public perception of him amid criticism over homophobic lyrics. Later, Rolling Stone ranked Stan among the 500 greatest songs of all time, but the song's influence didn't end there. Over time, Stan evolved into something much larger than a track. The term Stan, originally a character, began to describe real-life obsessive fans. It was first used colloquially online in the early 2000s, particularly in rap forums and early fan blogs. By the 2000s, it had become standard internet slang. In 2017, Stan was officially added to the Oxford English Dictionary, defined as an overzealous or obsessive fan of a particular celebrity. Eminem had accidentally created a new archetype and a new word. It was one of the rare cases where art doesn't just imitate life, it reshapes language. But how did we get from a fictional fan's suicide to a real-world community that reshaped Eminem's career, and now stars in his latest film?
Everybody's looking at me. Everybody's looking at me. Everybody's looking at me.
After Stan was released in 2000, something unexpected began to happen. People didn't just listen to the song, they identified with it. Not in the way Stan did, obviously, but in how it portrayed the emotional intensity of being unheard, unseen, and misunderstood. Many listeners, especially teenagers and young adults going through personal struggles, saw themselves in the fan.
For me, see, everything you say is real, and I respect you cause you tell it. My girlfriend's jealous cause I talk about you 24/7.
Originally, Stan was used sarcastically, a way to mock fans who were too obsessive, or as a metaphor, a warning. But as the internet evolved, especially with the rise of Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube, fans began reclaiming the term. It wasn't an insult anymore, it became an identity.
The song stands about an obsessed fan who's taking my too literal.
I had to look in the mirror and be like, am I one of these crazy stans?
People began calling themselves stans proudly. Eminem fans created forums, fan pages, tribute videos. Some tattooed his lyrics on their bodies. Others rapped his verses from memory, word for word. They dressed like him, dyed their hair blonde, or adopted his unapologetic attitude as a survival strategy in their own lives.
I do have an addiction to Eminem.
I travel the world for him.
Without Eminem, I wouldn't have the life I have right now.
By this point, stans were no longer just a concept, they were a real global community, spanning generations, languages, and countries. And that's exactly what Eminem chose to honor in 2025. With the release of his documentary Stans, Eminem turned the spotlight on his fans, the people who had carried his music through decades of controversy, reinvention, and personal chaos. But this wasn't a vanity project. Although the entire film is, in a sense, a journey through Marshall's entire career, he didn't center himself in the film. Instead, he stepped back and let them tell the story.
And I hate to be the bad guy.
The Stans documentary officially premiered in August 2025. Fans were able to watch the documentary in cinemas around the world, but only for a very limited time. The movie was directed by Steven Leckart. The film runs for almost 2 hours and is structured as a mix of biography and fan tribute. It retraces Eminem's entire career, from his turbulent beginnings in Detroit to his global superstardom, but through a very specific lens: the fans whose lives were changed by his music. What makes Stans different from any other music documentary is that Eminem barely appears in it himself. Instead, the focus is almost entirely on the fans, real people from all walks of life. The film includes highly curated fan stories from supporters whose lives were deeply impacted by Eminem's lyrics. Some got tattoos, one learned English via his music, another spoke to how he found comfort and strength in tracks like Not Afraid. One fan, Zolt Shady, has been a fan since 2001 and guides viewers through key locations in Eminem's Detroit hometown. Another fan even holds the Guinness World Record for tattooing the most images of a single artist. However, they all have one thing in common: they are stans. In the movie, they share how Eminem's lyrics helped them process pain, rebuild self-worth, or even stay alive. Their testimonials are intercut with archival footage of key career moments: the Slim Shady LP, the Marshall Mathers LP, the Eminem Show, the 8 Mile era, Marshall's drug issues and his recovery comeback with Relapse, Recovery, and beyond. But it's always their voices guiding the narrative, not Eminem's. Some of the most striking stories include a fan who credits Not Afraid with giving him the strength to walk away from a suicidal path, another who survived domestic abuse with Till I Collapse as her soundtrack, and a third who learned English through Eminem's lyrics and now works as a teacher. Each of these people, stans in the truest sense, carry pieces of his catalog inside them like armor. One of the most emotional moments in the film comes when fans reflect on how misunderstood Eminem often was, particularly during his peak controversies in the early 2000s. Instead of hearing the satire or self-loathing, critics heard only rage, but the fans heard the pain, the sarcasm, the vulnerability buried beneath the chaos, and that's what made them stay. Interestingly, there are also some really famous people among the fans, such as Ed Sheeran and Adam Sandler. The documentary also includes clips from concerts, meet and greets, and behind-the-scenes footage from fan contests over the years, or shows letters that fans wrote to Marshall echoing the storyline of Stan. That moment alone feels like a full-circle gesture. A fictional letter in 2000 becomes real in 2025. While the film doesn't shy away from the darker parts of Eminem's legacy, it doesn't dwell on them either. The controversies, the addiction, the lawsuits, they're acknowledged, but reframed through the lens of how fans stuck by him through every chapter. It's not about forgiveness, it's about understanding. And by the time the credits roll, one message becomes clear. Stan may have started as a cautionary tale, but 2 decades later, it became a tribute to a real, living, breathing community of people who saw themselves in the music and found strength in it. In Stans, the spotlight flips. For the first time, fans aren't on the periphery, they're at the center. So what does that say about an artist who once warned us about obsession? And what does it say about the healing power of music?
I'm not afraid.
It's been a ride.
When Stans hit theaters in August 2025, it wasn't treated like a typical music documentary. There were no viral stunts, no press run, no controversy-stirring headlines. In fact, if you don't follow Marshall's social media accounts regularly, it was very easy to miss the information about this film altogether. But the fans showed up, and so did the critics. Critics noted that Stans was more than just a celebration of fandom. It was a reflection of how deeply one artist's pain could resonate across decades, and how millions of people, many from completely different walks of life, still see a piece of themselves in Eminem's darkest verses. The documentary currently holds a 93% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes as of early September 2025. Fans describe the experience as emotional, unlike anything else Eminem has done, and the first time they truly saw themselves on screen in a story about him. Even longtime critics who previously dismissed Eminem as juvenile or too controversial acknowledge the maturity of the project. One review from The Independent described it as an unexpectedly moving tribute to the complexities of fame, trauma, and connection. And for once, there was no generational divide. Younger fans connected with the newer themes of identity, mental health, and resilience. Older fans saw their own youth reflected in the early Slim Shady era and how far they'd come. Perhaps the most striking thing about Stans is how little it tries to glorify Eminem. Although fans do this in their statements, of course, but he appears only in short interview segments. He doesn't dominate the screen, and yet his presence is everywhere. In the tattoos, the lyrics quoted from memory, the tears of people who said his music saved their life. This was never a film about Eminem. It was a film through Eminem, and it proved something that's been true for years, even if rarely said aloud. Eminem's real legacy isn't the awards, streams, or views, it's the people. And for once, those people weren't screaming from the crowd, they were sitting in the director's chair. By the end of the film, one thing becomes painfully clear. Stan, the fictional character who died tragically obsessed, gave birth to a real-world tribe of misfits, survivors, outcasts, and truth seekers. And instead of pushing them away, Eminem embraced them and he gave them the mic. But there is one more question we need to answer. Why was this film made in the first place? And why at this particular moment? Does it foreshadow Shady's impending retirement? Stay with us and let's find out together.
Hip-hop was the most important thing that empowered me as a kid. It made me feel tough when I wasn't. I was a scrawny little kid, growing up on 8 Mile, walking up the fucking block. Put headphones on, and it made me feel powerful.
Eminem has never been an artist who explains himself too much. Recently, he rarely gives interviews at all. He avoids public appearances unless they're strategic. And for most of his career, he's used alter egos. Slim Shady, Eminem, Marshall Mathers, like layers of armor. But with Stans, something is different. Instead of shouting or hiding, he's listening.
What's your first question?
In July 2024, Eminem released The Death of Slim Shady, an album built entirely around the idea of burying his most outrageous, controversial persona. A persona that once gave him fame, but also caused years of pain, addiction, and backlash. When I went to see Stans at the cinema, I honestly hoped that at some point we would get an explanation of what happens next. Is Slim Shady really dead? Was it just a metaphor? Unfortunately, Marshall did not answer that question. Well, at least not directly. The fact that after an album that allowed fans to go back to the beginnings of Marshall's work and once again feel the same emotions, the same atmosphere, and even hear the same voice of Shady in a new edition, Eminem decided to release a film summarizing his entire career while allowing his fans to describe in their own words how his music has influenced their lives may indicate one thing. Marshall pays tribute to his past, closes a chapter, and opens one on legacy. So why release this now, 25 years after the original Stan song? Some think it's Eminem preparing for the end of his career. Others think it's a form of penance, trying to make peace with the chaos his music once created. But maybe it's something simpler. Maybe for the first time in his life, Eminem is ready to be understood not for his rhymes, not for his anger, not for his alter egos, but for his impact. He doesn't need to perform anymore. He doesn't need to provoke. All he has to do is let others speak. And that, ironically, may be the most powerful performance he's ever given.
Lights, action, cameras flashing, managers, sponsors, concerts, monster mashing.
Along with the release of the Stans document, Eminem also announced the soundtrack for the movie. Of course, fans were eager to hear new songs. Most expected a project created specifically for this release, as was the case with 8 Mile and Southpaw. Unfortunately, however, it turned out that we didn't get any new songs. The soundtrack to Stans is more like a playlist of various songs from Marshall's discography that appear in the film. There is one exception though. Everybody's Looking at Me. It is a previously unreleased track from the Eminem Show era, which fans may associate with the skit The Kiss. Still, I think most fans might have felt disappointed.
I'm gonna kill this. I'm gonna kill him. I'm going to jail because I'm gonna kill this man. What?
And that's it. Now I want to hear what you think. Have you seen this movie? Do you identify with the stories of the fans presented there? Feel free to share your story and tell us what role Eminem's music has played in your life. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to show some love by giving it a thumbs up. And of course, if you're a fan of Eminem or just curious about the world of music, Stanzone is the place for you. Join our community by subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell to stay up to date. See you next time.